vary. Logan, spelled Logan.
May it please the court?
You may proceed.
Thank you. Dr. Logan, can you tell us, please, your occupation?
I'm a forensic toxicologist and analytical chemist.
Okay, and you may need to get a little closer to the mic. I'm missing some of the words there.
Okay.
Could you repeat again what you do?
I'm a forensic toxicologist and analytical chemist.
All right. And can you give us the benefit of your education?
I have a bachelor's degree in chemistry and a PhD in forensic toxicology, both from the University of Glasgow in Scotland. I subsequently had postdoctoral experience at the University of Tennessee in Memphis, Tennessee.
You didn't get the accent, I take it.
No, this is not a Tennessee accent.
All right. How many years did you study at the University of Glasgow chemistry?
4 years.
And can you tell me whether or not you graduated with honors?
I did.
All right. And what board certifications do you hold?
I'm certified by the American Board of Forensic Toxicologists.
And can you describe that board for me, if you would?
It's a professional certification board that evaluates the education and experience qualifications of people who practice in the field. It determines if they're qualified to take an examination. If so, you take the examination, and if you pass the examination, you're certified as a board-certified toxicologist.
And what is a toxicologist?
A toxicologist is somebody who studies, toxicology in general is the study of drugs, poisons, chemicals, and their adverse effects on organisms. Forensic toxicology deals specifically with the medical legal consequences of a person's exposure to or ingestion of drugs and chemicals.
Are you a forensic toxicologist?
Yes, I am.
All right. And how long have you practiced forensic toxicology?
Approximately 27 years.
All right. Are you an assistant professor with any university?
I have an appointment as a clinical assistant professor at the University of Washington.
All right. And can you tell me whether or not you have any background in gas chromatograph mass spectrometry?
I do.
And what is that background?
It was part of my training when I was in both undergraduate and graduate school. Subsequently, it's a technique that I use basically on a daily basis for the analysis of drugs and poisons in biological fluids and tissues in death investigation or human performance type casework.
All right. And approximately how many times have you conducted these tests over the last 27 years? Utilizing this equipment?
Thousands. Basically on a daily basis. I either, earlier in my career, performed these tests myself, or laterally, I review the data from those tests performed by other scientists in my laboratory.
All right. And can you tell me whether or not you teach or have taught gas chromatograph mass spectrometry?
I do. I currently teach it to students at Arcadia University in Philadelphia. I've also taught it at the University of Washington and the University of Tennessee.
All right. And with regard to, I'm going to call it GCMS, just to expedite things here. When you're using this equipment, are you testing tissue, fluids, and have you tested breath?
For gas chromatography, I've tested, yes, actually, tissues, fluid, and breath.
Okay. And are you familiar with cryotrapping?
Yes.
All right. And can you tell me your background with respect to cryotrapping?
It's a particular application of the technique called GCMS. It's a way to concentrate or amplify the contents of a sample to make them detectable.
All right. And what's your background in that?
When I was in graduate school, I participated in a project where we were examining chemicals that were present in automobile exhaust. So these chemicals were collected using a variety of different means, including collection on sorbent traps and in mylar or bags. And the contents of the bags were then injected into the GCMS or introduced into the GCMS into the cryotrapping mechanism where the chemicals are condensed out and then introduced into the GCMS.
All right. And doctor, can you tell me please whether or not you're a reviewer for any professional journals? And if so, A, what is a reviewer, and B, what journals?
I am a reviewer for a number of journals, including Journal of Forensic Sciences, Journal of Analytical Toxicology, Analytical Chemistry. A reviewer is somebody who participates in the peer review process. So if somebody writes an article, does some research and writes a paper, and then submits it to the journal for publication, the editor of the journal sends that article out to people who practice in the field, who are familiar with the techniques, who provide some review and critique of it, either suggesting ways it could be improved or saying that it is suitable for publication. And based on the reviewer's input, the editor would decide whether or not to publish the article.
All right. And who is your current employer?
I work for a company called NMS Labs in Willow Grove, Pennsylvania.
And can you describe what you do for NMS Labs?
I'm the National Director of Forensic Services for NMS Labs. NMS Labs is one of the largest independent forensic laboratories in the United States. We do forensic testing for coroners, medical examiners, law enforcement agencies in all 50 states. My specific responsibilities as National Director of Forensic Services are to oversee the toxicologists, the professional board-certified toxicologists who review the data, review the results, work with our clients, answer client questions, help with the interpretation of results. I also participate in the process by which we determine what new tests we ought to develop to serve that client community, how the tests are to be validated and verified before they're put into production. I also consult on medical legal cases, either civil cases or criminal cases, where I'm asked to write a report and provide testimony. These are my principal responsibilities.
Do you also work with a nonprofit organization in your capacity as the director of the lab?
That's really a separate responsibility that I took on last year. I accepted a position as executive director of the Frederick Reeder's Family Renaissance Foundation, which is an educational nonprofit that specializes in forensic science education for both graduate students as well as to introduce high school students to forensic science.
All right, and you mentioned that you do consulting work. When you do consulting work and money is paid for the consulting work that you do, where does that money go? Does it go to you?
Well, it doesn't go to me personally, but it goes to the company.
What departments are there at the NMS lab?
There are about a dozen departments, and they're divided up based on the kinds of analytical methods that they use in the departments. So it would include things like a screening department, a department that tests for the presence of metals, a department that does confirmatory testing by liquid chromatography, a gas chromatography department. So they're all specialized based on the type of instruments they use or the type of testing that they're performing.
All right, and doctor, are you an analytic chemist?
I am an analytical chemist, yes.
Okay, and how many articles have you published on analytical chemistry and toxicology?
Well, in total, I've published 80 peer-reviewed articles that have been published in the medical and scientific literature. The majority of them have been on the topics of analytical toxicology or chemistry, but I wouldn't say they're all on that topic.
Can you break down for me what an analytical chemist does?
They apply their knowledge about the properties of chemical compounds and molecules to determine the best way to separate them from the background or from the sample they might be in, to make sure that they're properly identified, and then often to quantify how much of them is present. So it's a question of looking at what the compound is, understanding its chemistry, understanding how it can be separated from other similar compounds that it might be present with, and what kind of instrument would be most appropriate to measure it.
Okay, and can you tell me, please, what professional organizations you belong to?
I belong to the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, the Society of Forensic Toxicologists, the International Association of Forensic Toxicologists, the International Council on Alcohol, Drugs, and Traffic Safety, National Safety Council's Committee on Alcohol and Other Drugs, the American Society of Crime Laboratory Directors, Canadian Society of Forensic Sciences.
What is the American Academy of Forensic Science? What sciences?
It's the largest professional organization in which forensic scientists in the United States participate. It has about 6,000 members in all disciplines, from chemistry to toxicology to biology to pathology, a number of different fields.
And what leadership roles have you served with regard to that organization?
I have served.
Your Honor, leadership roles do not go to qualifications, relevance.
I've served as the secretary and chair of the toxicology section. I've served as vice president of the organization, and I'm currently serving my second term as treasurer of the organization.
And are you familiar with the term scientific working group in the forensic science arena?
Yes.
And what does that mean?
These are groups that developed within this forensic science community, first of all unofficially, where people working in a particular discipline got together to determine where there was consensus in terms of the best methods to use for doing various kinds of forensic tests. The scientific working groups publish guidelines or standards that other laboratories can choose to follow. Over the last few years, the management of the scientific working groups has been taken over by the FBI, and they manage the activities of these. There are over 20 scientific working groups now.
Okay. And can you tell me whether or not there is a scientific working group for decompositional odor analysis?
Objection, relevance.
Approach. Objection sustained. You may continue.
Thank you. Dr. Logan, can you tell me, please, your background and experience with regard to accreditations and certifications having to do with forensic laboratories?
Sure. I am board certified by the American Board of Forensic Toxicologists, so the term certification applies to individuals. That group and some other groups offer a process called accreditation for laboratories. So the process of accreditation is ensuring that the laboratory requires with a certain set of standards in terms of how they perform analysis, how they select and train their staff, how they document what they do. They're typically lengthy standards. I serve on the board of directors of the American Board of Forensic Toxicology, and I was involved in developing the standards for the accreditation of forensic toxicology laboratories. That would have been in the early 1990s. Subsequently, my laboratory became accredited by ABFT. The laboratory that I
object. I believe this is beyond the scope of the question, and also relevance. His laboratory's accreditation is not relevant to this matter.
Overruled at this point.
The laboratory that I currently work for is also accredited by ABFT. I participate in ensuring that the laboratory conforms with those standards. I meet with and am interviewed by auditors when they come to review the work of the laboratory. NMS Labs has a crime laboratory that performs drug testing and DNA analysis. That laboratory is accredited by a different organization called the American Society of Crime Laboratory Directors Laboratory Accreditation Board. That organization similarly has standards to which the laboratory must conform. These are enforced by the laboratory reporting its activities as well as on-site audits and inspections that take place every year. So that's the basis for my familiarity with the process of accreditation.
All right, and how many organizations have you been involved in that either certify or accredit labs?
Well, the ones that I've named, the American Board of Forensic Toxicology and the American Society of Crime Laboratory Directors.
All right, and are you involved in the auditing process, or have you been over the years?
Yes, I currently do participate in that inspection or audit process on behalf of ABFT. I've done that since the program was introduced. I also historically have performed audits on behalf of the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration of the federal government that certifies workplace drug testing laboratories or accredits workplace drug testing laboratories.
I lost you at the end part. You said you performed audits on other labs, is that correct?
Yeah, workplace drug testing, urine drug testing is regulated by the federal government, and there's an organization within the federal government called SAMHSA, stands for Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. So SAMHSA is the organization that's responsible for accrediting laboratories that do workplace drug testing. And I have served as an auditor for the SAMHSA laboratory accreditation process.
All right, Your Honor, at this time we would seek to offer Dr. Logan as an expert in analytical chemistry, toxicology, forensic science, and laboratory accreditation standards, gas chromatograph, mass spectrometry, and cryotrapping, those areas.
I would need to, I have no objection to the forensic toxicology. As to any others, I would need to port ire.
You may.
Thank you. Let me do it from here so I can view
You
the
may.
list. Let's see. Your expertise in analytical chemistry, what kind of analytical chemistry do you perform other than that related to toxicology?
Well, it's hard to separate the two. Analytical chemistry is the application of gas chromatography, mass spectrometry, other spectrometric techniques, the analysis of a wide range of chemicals and compounds in a variety of different materials.
But the question is, when was the last time you performed an examination of analytical chemistry for something other than toxicology?
Well, that's part of my daily responsibilities. The crime laboratory that I oversee performs drug testing in non-toxicological specimens, so drugs that are collected or chemicals that are collected in the course of law enforcement investigations.
Well, under what circumstances, the question is, outside of toxicological examinations, what do you do in analytical chemistry that has nothing to do with toxicology? That's what I'm trying to find out. You seem to be telling me it's all talk. Go ahead.
Well, the analysis of drugs in evidence, well, toxicology deals with the examination of drugs in biological evidence. So that's toxicology.
Sure.
What I'm telling you is that I'm also responsible for the portion of the laboratory that conducts analytical chemistry on evidence that's not biological. So it would be unknown materials, mysterious white powders that are found in somebody's workplace or by law enforcement, drug evidence that's collected from people who are arrested for drug offenses.
So you would agree that your work is limited to either toxicology or supervising people that do analytical chemistry looking for drugs?
Not everything that we look
Poisons.
for are drugs. Some of them are industrial chemicals, some of them are poisons, some of them are
But you don't do that
inert
part.
materials.
I interrupt you, I apologize. But you don't do that. That's not the part of the lab you supervise. You supervise the toxicology section of the lab, don't you?
No, I do supervise the toxicologist, but I am also the director of the crime laboratory portion of NMS Labs.
Right. But your analytical chemistry is a very broad field, isn't it?
It is a broad field, yes.
It's a hugely broad field. Do you consider yourself an expert in every aspect of analytical chemistry?
No, I don't.
Right. So your experience is limited to that related to mainly toxicology. Is that correct?
I would say that my experience is mostly in the area of toxicology and in the techniques and methods that are used in toxicology examinations.
And your last experience with cryotrapping was as a graduate student, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And that's over 20 years ago, is that correct?
Yes.
I need to go up and look, see what the other areas were, Judge. I apologize, there were quite a few. You're not an expert in all areas of forensic science, is that correct?
That's correct.
Sorry. Your Honor, without spending too much time going back, this time I would object to any certification of expertise other than forensic toxicology. I believe his expertise is limited to that area.
Yes, ma'am.
This individual has a degree in chemistry with honors, and if I may also,
If it's going to be a long one, you need to come to the sidebar.
well, if I could just ask him one question, that might.
You may?
Okay. What did you do in the capacity of being the Vice President of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences with regard to all the other fields?
I served on the board of directors of the organization. The American Academy of Forensic Sciences promotes scholarship, research, education in the field of forensic science. So it's a way to bring all of the disciplines together to look for commonalities in terms of standards, in terms of good practice and professional development and education.
That's all I have, Your Honor, with regard to that.
Okay, the witness will be accepted as an expert witness only in the area of forensic toxicology and permitted to render opinions in that area.
Doctor, as a forensic toxicologist, I believe you testified that you use gas chromatogram mass spectrometry in your lab. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, in this particular case, can you tell me, please, what material you were provided with and you reviewed prior to coming here today and testify? What information were you given?
I was provided with some analytical records from the FBI laboratory with respect to the analysis of evidence collected from the trunk of Miss Anthony's vehicle. I was also provided with a report or a series of reports by scientists working at Oak Ridge National Laboratory that also related to the analysis of chemicals in evidence from the vehicle. I was provided with miscellaneous other documents related to the investigation of the case, including the autopsy records.
What about articles? What articles have you read prior to?
Objection, bolstering.
Your Honor, I'm sorry.
Overrule at this point.
Yeah, I wasn't provided with any articles in the course of this case, but I did review a number of articles I had in my possession, as well as obtain some additional articles with respect to the particular chemicals that were analyzed in the course of the investigation.
Can you tell me whether or not you have reviewed the 2008 article authored by, in part, Dr. Arpad Bas with regard to decompositional odors?
I have.
And that would be odor analysis of decomposing buried remains in the Journal of Forensic Sciences.
I have reviewed that article, yes.
Okay, I would like to talk to you about forensic labs for a moment. And, Your Honor, if I may have permission to use the tripod with the pad?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, you've testified that your lab is a forensic lab which is accredited by the American Society of Crime Lab Directors. I'm going to...
You may continue.
Thank you. Is this on? Yes.
Yes.
Dr. Logan, with regard to forensic labs, can you tell me, please, what the requirements are for the American Society of Crime Lab Directors?
Objection, relevance, as stated at the bench.
Sustain that question.
What is the difference between a forensic lab and a research lab?
A forensic laboratory is one that does analysis of evidence specifically for the purposes of it being presented in a court of law or before some kind of administrative review board. Certainly forensic laboratories do research. It helps them develop and improve and discover new ways of testing for things that haven't been detected or been able to be measured in the past. Research laboratories are typically academic laboratories whose mission is to simply discover new things where the application of them isn't necessarily clear of what the ultimate value will be. So they make discoveries that may have applications in medicine or in technology or in space travel or in any variety of different fields just based on discovering new properties of compounds or chemicals or objects.
Can you tell me, please, whether or not the research labs, particularly in this case, conducted proficiency testing?
Objection, basis of knowledge.
Sustain, establish a foundation.
Do you have any evidence, sir, that the Oak Ridge National Lab is a forensic lab and has been certified by the accredited American Society of Crime Lab Directors?
I have no evidence that it has been.
Do you have any evidence that the Oak Ridge National Lab has quality control standards in place?
Objection, basis of knowledge.
Sustain.
What is a validation test in a laboratory setting?
When a laboratory develops a new test, before they start applying it to, well, particularly in a forensic context, before they start applying it to evidence, the test has to be fully characterized to find out what its level of sensitivity is, whether there are things that could interfere with it or cause a false positive result, whether there are limitations to the test that would prevent it from identifying what it was designed to test for, which we would call a false negative. Determining...
Let me object to the answer as applying a forensic lab standard relevance. He indicated specifically, particularly in a forensic context, which is not relevant in this case.
Overrule, he can finish answering the question.
And then you have to establish what kinds of material are suitable to apply the test to and show that different types of material are not going to cause interference or erroneous results when the test is performed.
Can you tell me, sir, after the review of the material that you have, whether or not validation testing was done in this case with the testing that was conducted at the Oak Ridge National Lab?
Objection, basis of knowledge.
Sustain, establish a foundation.
All right, I had asked you the documents that you've reviewed. Can you specifically identify them for me? The reports, the dates of the reports, the authors, etc.
I can if I refer to my records. Thank you. Well, I was provided with copies of laboratory notes from Oak Ridge National Laboratory made by Dr. Wise and Dr. Voss relative to the testing of the evidence in this case, as well as some additional materials that were done, that were tested in evaluating the method. I reviewed a document entitled Forensic Report, Orange County, Orlando, Florida, Final Report, dated April 28th, 2009, that summarizes the results of the analysis performed by the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. The report was authored by Dr. Voss, Dr. Wise, and Dr. Martin. I also reviewed deposition testimony by Dr. Voss and Dr. Wise.
When you say notes, are you talking about handwritten bench notes?
Yes, I am.
Okay. And can you describe what those are, what those purport to contain?
They're, if you like, a commentary on some of the things that happened while the analysis was being performed, when there were, when the test didn't work, or when the something was wrong with the analysis, or when an unexpected result appeared. Sometimes they'll give a very broad summary of what the result of the test was, and they identify the samples that were tested during the course of the analysis.
And as a result of your review of the forensic report and the bench notes and the remainder of the material and the articles that you have indicated you have reviewed, have you reached conclusions with regards to the procedures and methodologies utilized by Dr. Voss and Dr. Wise with regard to the experiment that resulted in their report of April 28th, 2009?
Objection, it's beyond his area of expertise in forensic toxicology.
Sustained.
When you reviewed the bench notes, can you tell me, please, or the report, anywhere in the material that you saw, whether or not there was evidence that there was validation studies that were performed?
Objection, may we approach the bench?
You may.
Thank you.
Dr. Logan, can you tell me, please, after reviewing the materials that we've just referenced, whether or not there were established, published protocols on how to conduct the testing that took place at Oak Ridge National Lab?
There were no formal protocols for the testing that was performed.
And what significance, if any, does that have with regard to results of such a test?
Well, the test itself, or the approach to the testing, has been described and published.
Objection to the question outside of the area of expertise about its effect on the results of this test. It's not a toxicological question.
Sustained.
If a test is conducted without established, published protocols, what kinds of problems can occur?
Well, if you don't have a written procedure for doing the test, there's no way to ensure that the test is going to be done the same way every time, whether the instrument is going to be set up correctly to do the test, whether the results that would be produced if the test was run on different days would be reproducible. whether there are things that could cause false positives or false negatives with the test, if it's not done according to a standard procedure. If somebody is unfamiliar with the process or two different people are doing the test, there's no way to ensure that they're both doing the test the same way. It's critical that for a reliable scientific test that you have a written procedure.
Let's use your field of toxic.
Objection and move to strike the witness's opinion about whether something is a reliable scientific test. It's beyond his area of expertise in toxicology.
Sustain. Approach the bench. You may continue.
Thank you. Dr. Logan, can you tell me, please, after reviewing the material, whether or not there was any documentation of protection against contamination with regard to the samples that were tested?
There's no evidence of what protection might have been taken with respect to preventing contamination.
And can you tell me, sir, in general terms, the purpose of having protection against contamination of samples that are tested, just in general terms?
Objection to the relevance of generalities not related to the facts of this case.
Sustain.
Can you tell me, please, whether or not there were quality assurance programs that were referenced or discussed or mentioned in any of the material that you reviewed?
Objection, again, same as at the bench, the absence of information is not proof of the negative. It's not existence. I'll explain more if I need to.
Oh, you can answer that question if you can.
I saw no evidence of any quality assurance that was relevant to the analysis.
What is quality assurance?
Quality assurance is the process by which you document the performance of the test, in which you challenge it with samples that have a known composition to ensure that you get the correct result, to test samples that are known not to contain the chemicals that you're interested in analyzing to make sure that they're not present by contamination or carryover in the course of the analysis. Quality assurance also consists of a process called proficiency testing, where the test is applied to a specimen which the operator of the test or the person performing the test doesn't know what the correct answer is. They perform it blind.
Objection beyond the scope of the question was about quality assurance and laboratory procedures.
Sustain.
Can you tell me, please, after reviewing the material that we just discussed, whether or not there was documentation of how control samples were obtained, the manner with which proper control samples should be obtained, etc.?
Objection, compound question.
Sustain. Rephrase the question.
All right. Were proper controls discussed in terms of how they were obtained in this case in your material?
No.
And what is a control?
A control is a sample that contains a known amount of the chemicals that you're testing for. I'm
sorry, I object. This is beyond his area of expertise in toxicology. None of these questions involve toxicology. What is a proper...
Sustain. Rephrase your question.
In toxicology, sir, do you utilize controls?
Yes.
And can you tell us what you mean when you say controls in terms of toxicology?
Objection to the relevance of toxicological controls in the context of this case, which does not involve toxicology.
Sustain.
When you reviewed the reports and the records and the other material that you referenced, did you render or do you have any opinions with regard to, let me get my glasses here. Specifically, the bench notes as they discuss the manner with which the testing was performed on the samples the control sample, the negative control, and the positive control?
I'm sorry, I didn't follow that question.
That's because it was a terrible question. Let me rephrase it. Do you have any opinions after reviewing this material whether or not there was anything in the bench notes that caused you any concern about the manner with which the test was conducted?
Objection. Outside of their expertise in toxicology and attacking the other expert as in the Cuban case, I think the court knows.
Sustain.
What is your understanding with regard to the blank samples, specifically page 73 of the bench notes?
Same objection. Outside of their expertise and the Cuban case.
Sustain.
Can you define what a blank sample is in your field in terms of using a blank sample for gas chromatograph mass spectrometry?
Yes. A blank sample is a sample that's known not to contain the chemicals or the analytes that you're trying to test for. It's to ensure that there's no contamination or interference with the test when you're applying it to evidence.
And what happens if a blank sample is run, but the computer is not changed to be consistent with the blank sample?
Objection. Relevance. And outside of their expertise,
Your
if
Honor,
it deals with toxicology.
may we approach?
I permit him to answer the question.
I'm not sure I understand the question. It was about the computer?
Right, you're running a blank sample and you forget or you don't make changes on the computer, and then you have to do that and go back.
Your Honor, I objected also as a hypothetical, not based on the facts of this case.
Your Honor, may I respond? Or may we approach?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you tell me what the effect of running a blank sample but not changing the machine can have on the results?
Well, if you don't have the instrument set up or the machine set up appropriately to do the test, you won't get a reliable result.
And can you tell me the effect of not seeing a positive control when there should be a positive control? What is the significance of that?
Well, if you're performing a test on a sample that's known to contain a particular chemical or compound, and you perform the test and the compound isn't present, it tells you there's a problem either with the way the test was performed or the way the instrument was set up. And it's an example of why you ought to have a written protocol for doing the test.
Objection, not response to the question, and move to strike.
Sustain. Motion to strike granted.
All right, let me re-ask the question again, but ask you just to respond to the question, what is the significance of running a blank sample and the blank sample actually showing up as positive for a chemical when the chemical shouldn't be there?
If you're running a blank sample which is known not to contain the chemical that you're interested in testing for, and you get a result from your instrument that says it's present, then it's an indication of either contamination or a problem with the way the test was performed.
And what's the purpose of a blank sample in the first place?
It's to ensure that your test or technique doesn't give false positive results.
And what do you mean when you say false positive?
A false positive result is a result that's positive when the sample does not, in fact, contain what it is you're trying to test for.
All right, what is the significance of a closed valve essentially destroying or messing up a run. What does that mean?
I don't know that I think that question's too, I don't think I can answer the question the way it was asked.
All right. When you reviewed the reports and the materials, did you see any issues with valves being closed?
Yes.
Okay, and can you explain what you mean by that?
The bench notes that I reviewed from Oak Ridge indicated that sometimes when the test was run, the valves were not set in the appropriate position, and as a consequence, the result failed or gave a wrong result.
And what about triple sorbent tap freezing? Did that occur in this case?
Objection beyond the area of expertise of the witness.
Sustain.
What significance, if any, would it have to you if a lab were to be changing the technique that they were using in the middle of the experiment?
Objection beyond his area of expertise and relevance unless it applies to this laboratory.
I can explain.
Sustain, rephrase the question.
When you reviewed the notes that were taken in this case, can you tell me specifically whether or not any of the techniques were changed in the middle of the experiment?
Yes.
Okay, and describe that for me if you would.
The conditions of the analysis were changed over the several weeks in which the various specimens were analyzed in order to try to correct problems with the operation of the instrument.
What significance, if any, does that have in terms of the use of the machines and the manner with which they are interpreted?
Objection beyond his area of expertise.
Sustain.
What does that mean to you, the statement that you gave, in terms?
Objection, same question.
Sustain.
When you run a standard to determine if the machine is reading the standard, can you tell me whether or not that it is done typically on the same day that you run the experiment? Or you run, I'm sorry, that you run the sample?
Yes.
Why is that?
To ensure that you're testing the question sample or the evidence under the same conditions as you're testing the sample whose content is known.
Can you tell me, in this case, whether or not that occurred or did not occur?
It did not occur.
Do you know how many times?
Sorry, you just indicated it did not occur.
Okay. When you say did not occur, I need you to explain that. In other words, the standard's being run the same day as the sample?
I didn't count how many occasions that did not occur. There were specific instances in the notes where, or in the materials that I reviewed, where the evidence was tested on one date and the standards to ensure the proper functioning of the instrument were run days or weeks later.
Doctor, what is oleic acid?
Oleic acid is a fatty acid.
And can you tell me what compounds or what this can be found in?
Objection outside his area of expertise, toxicology.
Overrule at this point.
I'm sorry, your question was what?
Well, let's back up. Doctor, have you had an occasion to run tests in which there were fatty acids?
Yes.
How many times?
Fatty acids are prevalent in all kinds of biological materials, so they show up in the course of analyses that are done every day in toxicology laboratories.
So if you had to estimate how many times you engaged in testing wherein there was some form of fatty acid or fatty acids in the testing that you conducted, can you approximate for me?
It would be thousands of times.
Okay. Are you familiar with and have you engaged in testing in which the appearance of oleic acid occurred?
Yes.
What about palmitic acid?
Yes.
What about stearic acid?
Yes.
What about mysteric acid?
Myristic acid?
Myristic acid, I apologize, yes.
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell me, please, whether or not you are aware of what items can contain myristic acid?
Objection beyond his area of expertise, and it's beyond his area of expertise. He's a toxicologist.
Overrule at this point.
These fatty acids and many others occur in all kinds of biological materials, animal material, plant material, household products, foodstuffs.
When you said these, were you also referring to the oleic, the palmitic, and the stearic,
Yes.
as well as the myristic?
Yes.
You described some plant material. What other kinds of materials would you find this in? What other kind of food products specifically?
It's present in dairy products, in meat products, cheese, butter, milk.
If you were to test an item that contained oleic acid, palmitic acid, myristic acid, and stearic acid, let's say a towel, a paper towel. As a toxicologist, what conclusion would you reach with regard to those 4 items?
Objection beyond his area of expertise. Those aren't toxicological substances.
Overrule on that basis.
You would conclude that those fatty acids were present in the paper towel.
Which can be caused, I believe you said, from a number of items, including cheese.
Yes.
And the percentage of, for example, which fatty acid may occur higher. Let's say you have all 4 in a particular substance. Can you tell me, please, whether or not you are familiar with the ratio of fatty acids in meat pizza?
Objection beyond his area of expertise.
Sustain until you establish a foundation.
Doctor, have you conducted any research to determine the relative ratio of these fatty acids with regard to pizza?
I reviewed published articles that describe the relative ratios of these fatty acids in foodstuffs, including pizza, yes.
And do you have an opinion or do you have an understanding as to what that ratio is?
Objection. I have multiple objections.
Yes. Approach. Okay, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, at this time we're going to recess for lunch. I'm going to ask you not to discuss this case among yourselves nor with anyone else. Please remember all of my other previous admonitions will be in recess to 1:30.
Please be seated.
Okay, state recognized presence of jury.
Yes, Your Honor.
Does the defense?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, members of the jury, did you heed all of my previous admonitions during your recess? Okay, you may continue, Ms. Sims.
Thank you. I just have one final question. Dr. Logan, these 4 fatty acids that we've been talking about that can be found in food and biologic origin, etc. In this case, can you please tell me where those 4 fatty acids were found?
Objection. I'm sorry, where they're found. No objection. I'm sorry.
Questions?
They were found on a paper towel.
Thank you. That's all I have, Your Honor, at this time.
Okay. Cross-examination.
So is it your testimony that all three of these fatty acids found in combination are found in vegetable material?
States the testimony.
Oro.
You're not saying that all three of these in combination are found in vegetable material, correct?
I'm not sure I understand your question. A combination of one.
Oleic, palmitic, stearic, and mysteric.
Are all of them found in?
Those aren't found in combination in vegetable materials, are they?
Yes, they are.
What vegetables?
In oily vegetables like palm oil.
Palm oil.
Yes.
All right. Not in cabbage or that type of vegetable.
I'm not aware that they're present in cabbage.
But they are also present in decomposing animal fat, correct?
Yes.
Excuse me, Your Honor, I object. Mr. Ashton has objected with regard.
He's answered the question. Untimely.
Is there a difference in the length of the carbon molecules in milk, cheese, and butter fat versus adipocera?
The same fatty acids are present in adipocere as are present in dairy products.
Are there a difference in the length of the carbon molecules in those two different circumstances?
Well, there are multiple fatty acids in adipocere and in dairy products. The 4 fatty acids that have been discussed with me this morning are present in both. There are additional fatty acids that are also present in both.
Are the carbon chains in milk, cheese, and butter 4 to 10 carbons long, and the carbon chains in adipocera 14 to 18? Sorry. 4 to 10 carbons long, and the carbon chains in adipocera are 14 to 18 carbons long. Is that true?
The carbon chains in oleic acid is 18 carbons long. The carbon chain in stearic acid is 16 carbons long. Carbon chain in palmitic acid is 18 carbons long, and the carbon chain in myristic acid is 14 carbons long. These 4 compounds are found in both adipocere and in dairy products. There are other fatty acids that have anywhere from 6 to in the 20s carbon chains. There's a mixture of them. They're complex mixtures.
Are there other compounds that are found in milk, cheese, and butter, particularly processed for human consumption, that are not found in adipocera?
Yes.
So upon chemical analysis, the difference can be determined.
If these other compounds are tested for, yes.
Now, it is not unusual in any kind of examination of evidence in any context for there to be special challenges in looking at, in analyzing evidence on a GCMS. Isn't that true?
Is it unusual? It's not unusual for there to be special challenges. It can happen with any kind of evidence. It depends how complex or unusual it is.
Particularly with forensic samples.
Yes, I agree with that.
Forensic samples are rarely pure, so there's always challenges involved in those, correct?
Where you have standardized methodologies that are designed to accommodate the wide range of forensic samples that you're likely to encounter, you're going to have fewer challenges.
Are there situations where scientists are faced with challenges that are not in protocols?
Yes.
And what should a scientist do when faced with a challenge that's not in a protocol?
They should either develop a new protocol or adjust their protocol to accommodate the special challenges of that particular piece of evidence.
And that is an acceptable scientific procedure.
Yes.
Now, the protocols for the examination of decomposition odor are published in the Forensic Science Journal. Is that not correct?
The general principle is published in forensic science journals, yes, but not the detailed information as to exactly how the test is performed.
So the steps in the procedure are not published?
Correct.
So the Journal of Forensic Science does not give a step-by-step method of exactly how the samples are collected, how the triples open traps are desorbed, and how and at what settings it is run through the GCMS.
Well, with respect to those specific issues, some of that detail is contained in the published articles, yes.
Now, a blank is a sample of room air in its sense of a air examination. Is room air, which is run through a machine to determine whether there is any contaminants in the ambient air that should be of concern, correct?
That would be an example of a blank, yes.
Okay. And what should a scientist do when a blank shows some unexpected results?
They should investigate the cause of that, whether it's contamination or the instrument being improperly set up or operated, and ensure that it's, and retest the sample to ensure that it, after these adjustments, it gives the appropriate result.
So you stop what you're doing, figure out what the problem is, correct it, and then run it again.
Yes.
When a scientist is faced with even something as simple as a human error of forgetting to close a valve, the proper procedure is to stop, correct the error, and start over, correct?
Yes.
And in both of those circumstances that you referenced in the bench notes of the work in this case, that is precisely what was done when these challenges were faced. Is that not correct?
The problem was diagnosed. The notes contain some detail about Dr. Wise's or Dr. Voss's opinion about why the test failed, and then what they did differently to ensure that it worked properly the next time.
And then they ran it again,
Yes.
and then reported the results of those tests.
Yes.
No further questions?
Redirect?
You were asked about challenges. What did you understand the word challenges to mean when you were answering the question?
Something that was unusual or unexpected about the sample that was being tested.
And what effect do challenges have on the reliability of the study?
Objection. Pardon me. Objection to an opinion of reliability in the abstract.
Excuse me, Your Honor, I'm objecting to speaking objections.
Okay. Objection sustained. Next question.
You were asked about protocols with regard to the detection of decompositional odors. Published protocols. Are there published protocols that you saw in any article or any of the material in terms of how to collect air from a trunk of a car?
No.
I didn't hear you.
No.
Are there published protocols on how to collect carpet samples from the trunk of a car? How much carpet? How thick it needs to be? Where to put it?
Compound question.
I'll stop it.
Thank you.
Are there published protocols that you're aware of, sir, on how to collect carpet from the trunk of a car?
No.
What significance, if any, does that have to you in this case?
Objection. Opinion outside his area of expertise.
Sustained.
Dr. Logan, based on everything you've reviewed, including the report, the 2008 report that was referenced on cross-examination, all of the materials that you have, can you reproduce exactly this experiment that was conducted by Dr. Voss and Dr. Wise?
No.
And why is that?
Because there's a lot of detail missing, either from the laboratory, the bench notes, or from what was published in the Journal of Forensic Sciences about what the expected sensitivity of the test is, what other possible causes there could be for the patterns of chemicals that were identified in the test. So there would be no way for me to know whether the way I did the test was the same way that Oak Ridge had done the test.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Recross on those issues?
Dr. Logan, your laboratory couldn't do this test if you wanted to, could you?
Which test?
The test of the carpet samples in this case. Your laboratory doesn't do that type of test, does it?
We would be capable of doing that test.
All right. I'm going to show you State's Exhibit 114 in evidence, State's Exhibit 143 in evidence, State's Exhibit 322 in evidence, State's Exhibit 323 in evidence. Have you ever seen any of those?
No.
If you had been sent one of those, could you have tested it?
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, there's going to be a brief legal matter we need to take up outside of your presence. I will get back with you as soon as possible. All right. Mr. Ashton, your argument.
Yes, sir. I'm trying to find a case.
You may want to take a look at Hayes versus State, 660, 7th, 2nd, 257.
660,
660, 257, 7th, 2nd.
We'll do it. There's a case called Overton versus State that I'm trying to find the
Which one?
Overton, Overton versus State. It's on my desk right now. Unfortunately, I don't have it with me. That is also relevant to the issue. I'm just trying to see if this is the right Overton. There's a number of different ones. Yes, Overton versus State, 801, Southern 2nd, 877.
801 what?
Southern 2nd, 877, Florida case 2001. And I'll look up the other case, 257. Once the court's done, I'll proceed with argument.
Okay. Just trying to read Overton. You're talking about head note 18?
Yes, that discussion and then the paragraphs above that lead into the issue.
On Hayes, read at head note 8.
Yes, sir, I read it.
Okay, I hear arguments from both sides.
Yes, sir. You want me to go first?
Yes.
The state's position is that by defense counsel asking the question of this witness on redirect as to whether he could reproduce the results of the test, and his answer is no. I would submit that under Overton, that opens the door to the state's questioning the witness as to why he couldn't or whether he tried. So I would submit that the defense has kicked that door open by the question that was asked about the ability to reproduce the results of the test.
What about the opinion in Overton suggests that you could do that? Overton has to deal with some comments in closing argument where the defense tried to give the impression about one test and why they didn't do a second test.
Yes, sir. If you'll read the portion, I know you have, the portion leading up to the opinion, the reason for that is because the defense in their direct examination of their own witness, a chemist, discussed with the witness the issue of the existence of the essential, in this case was a spermicide, and whether I guess the state's argument was the existence of the spermicide was from some prior incident. And according to the case, during direct examination, the defense inquired whether the test conducted supported the state's theory that the spermicide was present in the bed sheet was simply a residue after the sheet had been washed. The witness testified that to make this determination would require the distribution of the chemical to be uniform throughout the sheet, and he would have recommended more testing because he could not conclude one way or the other. During cross-examination, he was allowed, the state was allowed to bring out that he had only tested one spot, and that when asked to make additional tests, that the defense attempted to prohibit him from doing so. I believe that in this case, just as in Overton, by the questions, the defense has opened the door to the issue of the ability of this witness to reproduce the results of the test, and therefore the question is permissible. In Hayes, as the court cited, Hayes stands for the basic proposition that the state cannot shift the burden to the defense unless they are asserting some defense that requires some burden, such as alibi, etc. Overton, I think, expands Hayes to acknowledge that sometimes the defense, by their questions, by their position they take in the case, can be so aggressive in their questioning as to, in fact, place a burden on themselves. And my submission would be that in this context, the defense's question went to that level of basically saying, can you reproduce the results? And it's fair game for me to discuss that with him.
And Ms. Sims?
Your Honor, I don't think it's even close. You were correct when you referenced footnote 8 in the Hayes case, allowing the prosecutor to elicit testimony over defense objection concerning failure of defense to request for testing was prejudicial and in error. My questions with regard to Dr. Logan had to do with the testing that was conducted in this case with regard to the protocol, the lack of standards. There's no way, as it was done in this case, it could be reproduced. That is completely different than opening the door to burden shifting. That would mean that defendants everywhere could not be asked any questions with regard to the science or reproducibility with regard to the state's witnesses, and I don't think that's what any of this case law stands for. It's clear that the experiment that was conducted in this case followed no protocols. There was no delineation as to how samples were obtained, why they were obtained, anything of that nature, and questioning that type of thing and asking if that particular experiment under those circumstances can be reproduced is not at all opening the door as suggested by the state. And we would move to also strike the comment and also ask for curative instructions. I think that this court is correct. Hayes is very clear. And the doctor answered when he asked, could you replicate this experiment? He said no. And the reason being, it wasn't clear what it was exactly or how it was done by Dr. Voss and Dr. Weiss.
Anything else from anyone else?
Not from the state, sir.
Okay. The Florida Supreme Court in Hayes versus State 667 2nd 257 addressed a proposition of law that basically deals with burden shifting, which shifts the burden of proof from the prosecution to the defendant. The court in Hayes, in an opinion authored by then Justice Overton, says as follows: the fourth error occurred when the trial court allowed the prosecutor to elicit testimony over defense objections concerning the failure of the defense to request testing of various pieces of scientific evidence. The state called as a witness an employee of the Broward County Sheriff's Office Crime Lab who testified concerning various pieces of physical evidence found at the scene of the murder, including clothing stained with blood. On cross-examination, the defense brought out the fact that the state had never requested a test of the blood stain. The apparent goal of this line of questioning was to cast doubt on the thoroughness of the state's investigation and to imply that a test of blood could have eliminated Hayes as a suspect. Then on redirect, the trial judge overruled a defense objection and allowed the state to inquire whether the defense had requested any testing of the bloodstains. The witness replied that the defense had not asked the crime lab to test the bloodstains and added that the lab had complied with such requests in the past for other defense attorneys. Similar comments were made by the prosecution in closing arguments concerning the failure of the defense to test hairs found at the scene of the murder. We find that the prosecutor's comments were prejudicial. In Jackson versus State 575 7 2nd 881 at page 188, a 1991 decision of the Florida Supreme Court, we found that the state had erred when the prosecutor commented on the defense failure to call a particular witness to testify. We explained, it is well settled that due process requires the state to prove every element of a crime beyond a reasonable doubt, and that a defendant has no obligation to present witnesses. Accordingly, the state cannot comment on a defendant's failure to produce evidence to refute an element of the crime because doing so could erroneously lead the jury to believe that the defendant carried the burden of introducing evidence. The prosecutor's questions and statements in the instant case may have led the jury to believe that Hayes had an obligation to test the evidence found at the scene of the murder and to provide that the hair and blood samples did not match his own. Clearly, Hayes had no such obligation. In the case cited by the state of Florida, Overton versus State, 801 7 2nd 877, which is a 2001 decision of the Florida Supreme Court. Just a second, lost my spot. Next, Overton suggests that the trial court erred in denying his motion for mistrial after the prosecutor made statements during the state's rebuttal closing argument that the defense had requested only one type of test, while the prosecution sought additional testing. According to Overton, the misleading argument suggested that the defense was hiding unfavorable evidence and thus a mistrial was warranted. A motion for mistrial should be granted only where the error is so prejudicial as to vitiate the entire trial. It goes on and talks about some things which are not necessarily applicable to the issue we're talking about. Based upon the evidence introduced at trial that the defense submitted one sample for testing and attempted to prevent Tragler from producing the additional confirmation test for whatever reason, we conclude that the prosecutor's statement during rebuttal that the defense only requested one test and that the state sought a confirmatory testing was a proper comment on the evidence introduced at trial. Moreover, because defense counsel argued during closing that more testing was needed, we concluded the state should have been able to rebut that argument by noting that the defense only submitted one sample for testing and that the state sought to have more confirmatory testing performed. Accordingly, we do not conclude that the court abused its discretion in denying the motion for mistrial because the prosecutor's statement was a proper comment on the evidence and any potential error was not so prejudicial as to vitiate the entire trial. The defense's objection to the line of questioning is sustained in that it would violate due process by shifting the burden of proof to the defense. Now, earlier before we recessed for lunch, I asked the defense to read the case of Cuban versus State, 9/7, 3rd edition, 50, dealing with attacking the validity of another expert's opinion. This witness has not been qualified as an expert in the area of air sample analysis. If you recall the order that I entered during the Fry hearing, when the doctor testified in that Fry hearing, and what I said in my order about that was that he was not qualified to render opinion in that area because what you produced at that time is only training and experience in that particular area had to deal with reading two articles, one by Dr. Strepanopoulos and by Dr. Vass. He is eminently qualified as a forensic toxicologist, has some knowledge in various areas of analytical chemistry. I would just tread very lightly in this particular area because while you did not, quote, open the door, it looks as though you're trying to get it cracked open. And Mr. Ashton looked like he's prepared to run a Mack truck through that door. While we will not have any burden shifting, there's that adage, you cannot use the burden of proof, that is, you can't use it as a shield and then turn around and take it and use it as a club against the state. The proper line of, that's not my job. At this point, that line of questioning dealing with the cans at this point is sustained, subject to somebody opening the door. So,
Your Honor, under the circumstances with Mr. Ashton going up near the jury with the evidence, and it appeared somewhat, I guess, dramatic, we would request instructions to the jury, a curative instruction to the jury in light of the manner with which this came about, holding the bags of evidence and coming up and lining them up in front of the witness. We just asked for a curative instruction to the jury in light of the manner. And
Well, you didn't object to it. The only thing you objected to was burden shifting. Well, you know, if I do that, the only thing that's going to do, Ms. Sims, is do an instant replay on that. If you're asking for instruction to disregard the last line of questioning, that would be the last question that was asked by Mr. Ashton, and say that the objection is sustained. I can do that, but
I have a feeling that would be just fine if we could remove those items and place them back on the table as well.
we can do that. Get to the microphone, Mr. Mason.
Quotation from the opinion you first read in this decision has exactly an appropriate curative instruction. That is, it is well settled that in the law, the defense has no burden of proof. Remember that?
Yes, sir.
That sentence from the Supreme Court would be an appropriate curative instruction, in my opinion, and we request that.
So you're asking an instruction on the burden of proof? Okay.
As to which question is that related?
I've asked the court reporter to do it because she can probably pick it up faster than I can strolling back through this. For the last question, I asked her to find it, and I will do that, and let me,
Just a moment. Sorry. The question was, if you had been sent one of those, could you have tested it? At this point, Your Honor, that does not imply who could have sent him the item. So at this point, Your Honor, you've instructed me to go no further, and I shall. At this point, no curative instruction is necessary because it does not imply that defense is burden.
out of abundance of caution, I think the curative instruction is necessary.
Now, I just want to make sure I understand the courts correctly. Is the court indicating that I should go no further into his ability to do it or not do it, or simply not?
If you want to proffer that, let's go ahead and do it now. I think you do have a right since she raised the question. I don't think you can put the cans up there and ask him about his,
I would not.
Whether or not he could examine that. But I think the question that she asked was,
Whether he could reproduce the results.
yeah.
Dr. Logan, in your laboratory, could you take a sample of this carpet, one of these cans, and put it in a Tedlar bag?
Or could we be capable of doing that? Yes.
Could you heat it at 35 degrees centigrade for 48 hours, I believe is what the notes say was done?
Yes.
Could you extract an amount of air as indicated in the laboratory notes?
Yes.
Could you inject that into a GCMS with cryotrapping?
We do not have an instrument that is set up to do cryotrapping, but if we had such an instrument, we could do that.
Could you set the instrument in accordance with the laboratory notes on the item of the carpet sample item that was tested?
No.
Why not?
There is not sufficient information in Dr. Voss's published paper or in his laboratory notes to accomplish that.
What is absent from the laboratory notes as to the examination of the carpet sample from the can that you would need to set your machine in order to run it? I'm not talking about interpreting the results right now. I'm just talking about running it.
I would need to review his article, and I would need to review his article.
So at this point, you're not sure.
That's correct.
All right, well, if you need to take a moment to do that, aren't the settings for the machine in the bench notes?
No.
There's nothing about the temperature to be set, or that's not in the bench notes? No, Judge, I'll just withdraw it. It's not worth all this.
The question by the defense, in some ways, opens the door, but not to the point that this whole area is just like walking on quicksand.
That's fine, Judge. I'll withdraw it.
Well,
It would appear that it would.
to the defense, when you're trying to impeach an expert, you cannot impeach the validity of the expert's opinion. You have to do that